Welcome everybody to Starting Seeds Indoors with EnviroWestern. And thank you for joining us today. So thank you very much. And also thank you so much for the ladies from EnviroWestern for being with us. So you can go to the next slide, please. So welcome, my name is Kelsey and I am the Signal Boost Coordinator with Reforest London. And for anyone who isn't familiar with us, we are a London, Ontario based charitable nonprofit organization with the mission to plant, grow and sustain our urban forest by engaging our community. So in addition to tree planting initiatives, in 2019, we also became the founders of the new Westminster Pond Centre for Environment and Sustainability. This center will be a community hub with services and programming that promote environmental excellence, sustainability, health, and well-being across our region. So the Signal Boost Initiative is a program of the Westminster Pond Centre, which allows us to dramatically increase the number of public and volunteer educational opportunities that are available in London. So while the events will eventually take place at the centre, we are able to provide online learning opportunities until the COVID shutdown ends. So this event is made possible with support from the Ontario Trillium Foundation, and I would also like to acknowledge Canada Life, who have been the lead sponsor of Reforest London since 2009. Okay, and next slide, please. So the Signal Boost Initiative has a lot of events going on all the time. So this is our next event that we're happy to be supporting. So this Saturday, CD Saturday, if you've heard of it, you may have been before. It's kind of a London institution at this point. So it's from the London Middlesex Master Gardeners. And if you can go to the next slide, there are 3 different speakers talking about different gardening topics. One is about raised beds and preparing your winter pantry and some lesser known vegetables. So that's free. Well, it's by donation, so minimum of at $1, and it goes to the Master Gardeners. So yeah, if you're interested in that, then check that out as well. So if you want, you can go to reforestlondon.ca and go to our workshops page and you'll see that listed there. Okay, so with that, I am pleased to introduce Nadine, Vanessa, and Natalie. They are the garden executives of EnviroWestern. Take it away.
So hey everyone, welcome to our webinar. We are with EnviroWestern and Reforest London has graciously funded this webinar for us today. And we're excited to talk to you about how to start seeds indoors. So before getting started, we would like to acknowledge the land that we stand on that enables us to bring this webinar for you today. We acknowledge that Western University is located on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenape, and Attawandaron peoples, on lands connected with the London Township and Sombra Treaties of 1796, and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant, Wampum. With this, we respect the long-standing relationships that Indigenous nations have to this land, as they are the original caretakers. We acknowledge historical and ongoing injustices that Indigenous peoples like the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit endure in Canada, and we accept responsibility as a public institution to contribute towards revealing and correcting miseducation, as well as renewing respectful relationships with Indigenous communities through our teaching and community service.
So a little bit about EnviroWestern. We are a Western USC student portfolio that promotes environmental sustainability. We have such as things of advocacy, ways for students to get involved with sustainability, and many other things. We also focus on making Western University campus more sustainable. And as gardening executives, we maintain the Western University food gardens. And today we are actually starting some of our seeds for our garden. A little bit about who we are. We are EnviroWestern gardening executives. I'm Natalie. I'm in 2nd year environmental sciences and biology at Western. I'm really passionate about sustainability, environmentalism, as well as growing my own food and gardening.
Hello everyone, I'm Vanessa. I'm in my 6th year at Western studying global development studies and health sciences. My interests include food sovereignty, social justice, and environmental racism.
Hi, I'm Nadine, and I'm in my 7th year at Brescia studying food and nutrition. I'm really, really passionate about the environment, and I'm passionate about creating a future of food that is good for people and for the environment. So today in our webinar, we're going to talk about why we would plant seeds indoors, the things you should consider, making a plan before you start planting your seeds indoors. So we're going to have a live demonstration. We're going to talk about caring for your seedlings and then preparing to transplant our seedlings out into the garden. So why do we want to start seeds indoors? Some climates, such as London, have shorter growing seasons. And so planting indoors, we gain weeks of growing time. A growing season is determined by calculating the amount of days between your last frost date in the spring and your first frost date in the fall. And in London, this is approximately 145 days. Some crops also take a longer time to reach maturity and can take anywhere between 100 to 200 days. So it's important to start them indoors so you can harvest them before the end of your climate's growing season. Additionally, by starting seeds indoors, you're able to see earlier harvests in some of your vegetables without waiting until the end of the summer to harvest a pepper or a tomato. And those plants love heat, so they would probably die if you left them outside to the frosty nights at the end of the summer. Finally, starting seeds indoors is relatively inexpensive, and you can save a lot of money by starting your seeds indoors instead of buying transplants from the store. So while you're getting ready to start your seeds, there are a few things that we need to consider. So we need to make a plan for what seeds we're going to grow based on the amount of space that you have in your garden or your balcony or wherever you plan to start planting wherever you plan to have your garden in the summer. Making sure you have the right amount of materials to provide your seedlings with the right conditions, and also giving some thought to how we'll transition our seedlings into the harsh elements of the great outdoors. So when planning what you're going to plant, keep in mind that some seeds should be started as seeds, while some seeds should be planted directly out into the garden. We'll have that on the next slide for you guys. Most of the time, that information will be found on the seed packet that you buy. And also in the packet, you'll find a description of the plant, how tall it will be, the plant's space requirements, the expiration date and the plant before date, the planting depth, so how far you need to put the seed when you're either planting it as a seedling or out into the garden, whether the plant needs shade or sun, the required germination conditions, how much time it takes to germinate, and how much time the plant takes to reach maturity, so when you plant it as a seed to when you're ready to harvest it. And finally, the type of soil required for the plant to grow. Descriptions on seed packets will vary depending on the company that you buy your seeds from. But if there's any missing information, a lot of the stuff is on the internet and you can find a lot of that online. So what is germination? Germination is the time it takes for the seed to be planted and for you to see a little sprout. And some require heat, some require cold, and the days to germinate change from seed to seed. For example, parsley needs cold to germinate and takes about 14 days, while some crops like spinach and lettuce, they also need cold and they'll die actually if you give them too much heat, like for example, 25 degrees or more. And it's important to provide the right conditions for your seedlings so that they can survive. Sometimes soaking seeds overnight can help with the germination rate. So soaking them between 12 to 24 hours until you start to see the seeds swell up a little bit. For example, seeds like spinach and beets need to be soaked before planting. Most flowers and beans and large seeds will germinate faster if you plant them overnight. However, seeds like carrots, they're very, very, very small. So if you soak them overnight, it'll be really hard to handle them. So it's better to just plant those directly. If you see that a seed packet mentions scarification, that means that there's a very hard coating on the seed, and you need to nick it lightly with like a nail file or a sandpaper, and that'll help the seed germinate. And if you see stratification on the seed package, that means that you need to provide a moist and a cold treatment. For example, flowers. Most flowers need to be stratified before planting because it simulates what happens outside. After the summer, the flowers will drop their seeds and the seeds will get covered by the leaves, and then the leaves will get covered by the snow, and they'll be really cold all winter long. And then when the snow melts, it gets really, really wet. And then the flower is able to germinate and grow again. So you need to kind of simulate that environment. And you can do that by putting it in a paper towel and wetting it lightly and putting it in a bag and putting it in your fridge. And you can find these, oftentimes it'll say on the package whether it needs to be stratified or scarified. And the seed packet will also tell you how many seeds you should plant, as well as how early you should start your seeds inside. For example, the pepper package on the slide says you should start your seeds indoors 4 to 6 weeks before your last frost date. So in London, it's kind of the end of May, so we would count 6 weeks back from the last frost date, and that's when we would start our peppers inside. So here is the list of plants that should be started as seeds and plants that should be sown directly into the garden. This is a list based on the London climate, and the plants that are starred can be started inside or can be started outside. But in our list, the things that are in the start as seeds are the things that we're going to start inside. So vegetables with a sensitive taproot like carrots or beets or radishes or turnips, they don't like to be disturbed. So they're very sensitive. It's important to start those directly outside. Also, plants that have a shorter growing season and can have a full life cycle outside can be sown directly outside. Other plants that are very cold hardy can sometimes be sown directly into the ground 2 to 4 weeks before the last frost date, such as spinach, kale, lettuce, arugula, snap peas, potatoes, and poppies, flowers. And cold hardy refers to how sensitive it is to frost or not. So it can tolerate a lot of frost. A plant that is cold hardy can tolerate frost. Plants that are very sensitive to frost are referred to as tender plants. And long season tender crops like tomatoes, peppers, ground cherries, and eggplants should be started indoors. But shorter season tender plants can be started directly outside. It's important to set out your tender crops after all danger of the last frost is past. Other long season crops like gourds, leeks, melons, squashes may not have enough time to come to maturity if sown directly outdoors in a climate like London's. So you should start those indoors. However, if you're living in a climate that has a longer growing season, you can experiment with planting those outside. So after we've considered what plants we're going to grow, we want to figure out the appropriate timing based on the area's last frost date. So in London, that's the end of May. We've figured out what we need to plant based off the maturity, the length it takes to maturity for the seed that we're going to grow. And we can start thinking about the materials that we'll need, as well as the conditions we should provide our seedlings in order for them to germinate and grow.
So hello everyone. Now I'm going to be talking about the materials that you'll need, as well as the ideal conditions you'll need for starting your seeds indoors. So in terms of materials, the first thing you have to think of is your potting mix, which you can purchase at a local garden center or you can make your own. It's important to note that a potting soil mix is very different from regular soil that you find outside, like in your your backyard or in your own garden outside. Garden soil tends to be very clay and heavy, and seeds will have a hard time developing a root system if you use that kind of soil. So a potting soil needs to be lighter, more airy, which will give room for the roots to grow and also allow water to drain really well. You don't want seeds to be constantly wet. When making your own, you can use vermiculite or perlite, which will allow for better drainage as well as airflow. If you choose to make your own potting mix, we have 2 basic recipes on the screen. So the first basic recipe includes 4 parts compost, 1 part perlite, 1 part vermiculite, and 2 parts peat moss. These things can be purchased at a local garden center. And in our second basic recipe that doesn't include peat moss, we have 1 part compost, 1 part coco coir, which is the husk from a coconut, and you need to soak it in water before using, and also 1 part vermiculite. Again, you can buy these at a local garden center such as Heman's or Parkway Gardens, Canadian Tire, or whatever is local to you or around you. So the next thing you have to think of with your materials is your growing medium. So again, you can go to a local garden center and purchase a seedling tray, which will have a plastic tray and cells that have drainage holes. Drainage holes are very important because it will prevent water from pooling at the bottom and causing root rot. Also, you have to make sure that you put the trays under the growing cells to make it easier to pick up your seeds and move them around if you want to. And you can purchase a tray from a garden center, as I mentioned before, or you can also use what you have around home, such as a baking sheet, and just put that underneath your cells. So it can catch the water and also, again, moving your seeds around home. And the seedling trays should not have any holes because, again, they have to catch water. Now, another thing to note is with the seedling trays, you can use your own potting mix, but sometimes they can come in a kit with the pellets, like on the screen. If you choose to use the pellets, then they already have the soil mixed in there, and you would just have to pour water and they would expand. Another thing, whoops, sorry. Another thing with the seedling trays is that they can enable watering from the bottom, which is more ideal than watering directly into the soil. And it will allow the roots to absorb the water and also prevent fungal diseases from happening, or help prevent those from happening. And if you choose to use something that you may have around home, instead of purchasing a seedling of the growing cells, you can do so. There's a lot of DIYs available online. And you can use things like toilet paper rolls, egg cartons, you can even use recycled newspaper, you can use eggshells, all of which are biodegradable, so that's great. You can also use plastic containers, such as a big yogurt container. You just have to make sure that you make a drainage hole at the bottom so that the water is able to come out and prevent root rot, and also just have your tray underneath. Okay, so the next set of materials that you need is fertilizer and vermiculite. So seedlings benefit from a fertilizer that's higher in nitrogen because you want your seedlings to grow strong leaves and stems. So when you're looking for a fertilizer product, look for one that has the NPK label, which stands for nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, and make sure that it has a 5:1:1 ratio. Phosphorus is good for producing flowers in fruits, tomatoes, and veggies, but it's not as important when starting out seeds. When you're buying fertilizer, it's beneficial to look for one that is liquid because it absorbs faster. Powdered fertilizer can take up to 2 weeks for seeds to absorb, so that's not as ideal. And you can buy, there's 2 types of fertilizer that you can buy. So there's synthetic and organic, which can have ingredients from fish, seaweed, and compost. And that whichever one you choose is really up to your personal preference. You can also make your own fertilizer with something called Compost Tea. We have a basic recipe on the screen there. Compost tea is basically involves soaking compost in water and adding some sort of nutrient source, such as molasses, to feed the good bacteria. So if you're looking for a vegan option, then you can use compost tea as your fertilizer. If you want to avoid using as much fertilizer for your seedlings, you can mix compost into the potting mix. So it'd be 50% compost, 50% potting soil beforehand, and then that way you won't fertilize as often. When you start fertilizing, you want to start at 4 weeks old. So your seedlings have to be 4 weeks old. That's when you start fertilizing. And then you would continue to fertilize every 7 to 10 days. Another thing that you have to keep in mind is fertilizer products tend to be made for more mature plants. So it would be best to fertilize or dilute the fertilizer by half the amount that's indicated on the package, usually on the back where the directions are. And that would be more suited to the seedlings. And then the next thing that you need in terms of materials is vermiculite. Vermiculite is a naturally occurring mineral made from dry compressed silica, and it was expanded. It's very absorptive. It's like a sponge, and it feels kind of like a sponge. And this helps the soil retain moisture. Seedlings won't tolerate dried out soil. So once you plant your seeds into the potting mix, you can sprinkle the vermiculite on top, like Parmesan. If you don't want to use vermiculite, you can take a dry potting mix and just sprinkle that on top. And yeah, that's an option for you. So the next thing you have to think of when starting your seeds is the ideal conditions. And there's two main things that encompass the ideal conditions. So there's light and then watering. So seeds need 16 to 18 hours each day of light, 10 hours minimum. And this is to avoid your seedlings growing into leggy plants, which are pale, they grow long and thin. If that does happen, that's okay. When you're transplanting them, you can put them in the soil and put the soil up to the first leaf. So, there is a solution to that issue, but if you wanted to prevent that entirely, you have to make sure there's adequate light for your seedlings. So with light, you can use the natural source of light from the sun, which also provides heat. However, this is not ideal for providing even and long enough light because obviously the sun moves throughout the day. What would be more ideal is purchasing LED growing lights that provide cool and or warm light. LED is important because not fluorescent lights, because fluorescent lights can essentially cook your seeds, which you probably would not want for your seedlings to thrive. And also with LED lights, you can use a heating mat. You can purchase a heating mat if you would like, and this can help increase the germination rate, but that's up to you. It's not always necessary. And then the other thing for ideal conditions is watering. So for seed germination, you have to make sure that you keep the soil damp but not too wet. Overwatering tends to be a common issue when you're starting your seeds, so you want to avoid that entirely. Once you're done watering your seeds, you should cover the seedlings or the set of seeds with a tray or a container to help keep the moisture in. And you would just do that until the seeds start to germinate. And as mentioned before, it's best to use the bottom-up method by watering directly into the tray to help avoid fungal diseases from happening.
So now we're going to do a live planting demonstration. We're going to plant some chives today for you guys. So here's our chive seed packet.
Hey guys, would you mind even stopping sharing your screen, and then
Sure.
people can go into the top right corner where it says view and click on speaker view. and then you'll be able to see what they're doing with the full screen.
Here we go.
Perfect.
Cool. So we're ready to go. So the key word.
Full screen or are we on full screen?
No, we're on full screen. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So when you're planting your seedlings, the key word to remember is loam. And loam is soil that is a consistency between clay and sand. Loam is the perfect texture that provides enough air, enough drainage, and also the nutrients that your seeds will need to grow. So you need to make sure that your potting soil is adequately wet. So what we did is we just took our potting mix that we bought from the store and we put water in it. And it's almost like a crumbly cake batter consistency. And that way it will help with the seeds sticking to the soil when we plant them. So what we're going to do is we're going to fill our growing medium with soil. We have cells here which have the drainage holes in the bottom, and we're using this as our tray. We're going to fill our growing medium with soil. And when you're filling your growing medium with soil, you don't want to pat down. You want to tap down so that all of the soil can go into the empty spaces in your tray. So keep patting it down and filling it until it's good to go. You want to fill it all the way to the top. And all the cells need the same amount of soil. So once the soil is filled, we're going to take our seed packet and we're going to pour a few seeds into our hand. So it's important to make sure we don't pour the whole packet, just a few seeds. And some seeds pour out very fast. So just a few. And then you're going to place the desired amount of seeds directly into the middle of the cells. So we're going to plant 2 seeds because we think that our chives are going to germinate very well. So we're going to plant 2 seeds directly into the middle. And it's important to place them in the middle and not on the sides, because if you place them on the sides, the root growth will be impacted. So then once the seeds are in, we're going to lightly sprinkle vermiculite on top. But like we said, if you don't want to use vermiculite, you can use potting mix. This potting mix is dried out. We took some out before so that we didn't wet it, because it needs to be, the potting soil that you sprinkle on top needs to be dry. So we're going to show an example with potting soil and also vermiculite. So lightly sprinkle it on top so that it's all covered. The whole cell is covered. So it's like you're sprinkling Parmesan on top of pasta. And since the soil is damp, since our potting soil is damp, we only need to lightly water it. So now we're going to show you sprinkling potting soil on top of the other one. So if you don't want to use vermiculite, you can just use potting soil instead. And then your seeds are ready to germinate. We need to water our seeds very lightly. And when you water it, make sure that it's like a light rain. Very, 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 very gentle rain, so that you don't overflow the seeds. Like that. That's perfect. So now our seeds are ready to grow, and we have a little stick that says chive so that we can remember what our seeds are, and we're just going to stick it in right there, and they're going to germinate and they're going to stay in the tray. And we could water in the tray if we wanted to from the bottom up, or gently water it from the top. So that was our seedling demonstration. Now we're going to start presenting again.
Okay, so next we're going to talk about potting up. So sometimes certain plants will outgrow their seedling trays and will need to be potted up. So generally you want to pot up plants that grow as seedlings for 6 to 10 weeks. Also, this includes peppers, tomatoes, eggplant, and perennials. They require more nutrients and growing space. And to know when to pot up, you want to look underneath and see if the roots are poking up from the drainage hole or reaching up out of the soil. And this is a sign that the roots are looking for more nutrients.
Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to mention that we don't see your slides. Are we supposed to?
Oh, yes. Sorry. So yeah, like I said, certain plants will outgrow the seedling trays. So this is generally plants that grow for 6 to 10 weeks as seedlings. And this also includes peppers, tomatoes, eggplant, and perennials. They require more nutrients and growing space. So when you decide when you need to pot up, you will look for the roots if they're poking out of the drainage hole. And this means they're looking for more nutrients. And when you are potting up, you want to get pots that are at least double the volume from the pot that the seeds were in previously. You want to fill your pots and leave about 1 to 2 inches of clearing from the top to leave space for watering. Then you want to make a hole in the middle, the size the plant you're potting up. Place the plant in the hole and lightly tap down on the soil, and then water your new plant and you're done potting up. So the next stage when you're preparing to transplant your seedlings and plants into the garden, you want to do something called hardening off, which is gradually introducing harsher elements to the plants to get them exposed to the natural elements of the garden. This should take about 1 week, and it is the last week that the plant is considered a seedling. And most seeds are typically planted outdoors after the last frost date. However, some cold hardy plants can be planted outdoors 2 to 4 weeks before the last frost date. And again, this last frost date will change depending on your area, but in London, it's the end of May to 4 weekend, around then. Usually there's a range. So to harden off, it takes about a week, and you want to do things that are different on each day. So on the first day, you want to put all of the seedlings outside for 1 to 2 hours in the shade with no wind. And if you need to prevent the sun and the wind, you can use a white bed sheet over your plants to prevent some sun from penetrating and the wind as well. In addition, this goes for the rest of the days when you're hardening off. They will need 16 to 18 hours in the sunlight. So if you're putting them outside for 1 to 2 hours on the first day, you want to put them out indoors for 14 to 17 hours as well. So it won't change. You're going to have in total 16 to 18 hours in the sunlight. On the second day, you want to put them out for 4 hours in the shade with no wind. On the third day, they're out for 6 hours in the shade with no wind. On the fourth day, they can be out for 4 hours in some sun, so not direct sunlight, but not in the shade and a little bit of sunlight. On day 5 and 6, you want to expose them to some wind. And if there is no wind on this particular day, you can rub your hands on the plants to simulate wind, and they should be outside in the sun for about 5 hours on this day with some sun. On the 7th day, you want to transplant by the end of the day. And it's okay if the potting soil is dry. They need to be accustomed to like harsher elements and not being watered as much. In addition, when you transplant, you want to make sure that there's no bulb or root. So you want to transplant early enough. And after a week of hardening off, your plants are ready to be transplanted into the garden. And if possible, you want to choose a cloudy day and water very well after your planting. So back to the last frost, the timing of all of this. If there is a range, you want to plant your tender plants, so peppers, eggplants, tomatoes are examples, on the latter end of the range. And for cold hardy plants, you want to plant at the earlier range. And depending on your plant, you can see on the package when they're needed to be planted. And once you do all of this, you're finally ready to put all of your plants into the garden and have a wonderful growing season. So now we have time to take any questions. So if you left questions in the chat or if you want to leave questions now, we'll address them as well as we can. And we got a good amount of time for this, so any questions you might have, we'll try our best to answer them.
Okay, if you'd like, I can do that. We'll go back up to the top. There have been a number of questions that came in, so thanks to everyone.
Awesome.
And then keep them coming. Okay, so Clara asked, I'm wondering, will we get the information by email? So I had mentioned that I'll send the recording, but is there any other references or resources that you'd be able to share?
So, yep, it will be by email, and as well, the recording will be posted on Facebook. And I believe this is on EnviroWestern's. If you go onto EnviroWestern's Facebook, under the event for starting seeds indoors, we'll post it there, as well as on Reforest London, I believe.
Yeah, and everyone will get an email with the link to the webinar after.
Yeah.
Yes, and we'll share it on our social media. So both Reforest London and Westminster Pond Center, if you haven't liked that page yet.
Yeah.
Actually, a lot of really great comments. Thank you, everybody who said some really nice things. So just so the speakers know, they say it was really well done. Kelly asks, so is the fertilizer so the half fertilizer is at the 4-week stage? So she just wanted to confirm that.
No, so if you don't want to fertilize with liquid fertilizer, when you're starting your seedlings, you would mix your fertilizer, you would mix your potting mix with half compost. So by having compost in your potting mix in the beginning, you don't need to fertilize. So 50% compost, 50% potting mix, and that would act as your fertilizer. So you wouldn't need to fertilize at 4 weeks.
Great, thanks for clarifying. Lisa asks, can you use a mister to do the first watering?
Yeah, you definitely could. You just need to mist a lot. And some misters spray more, but obviously, like it doesn't need to be super watered because the potting mix is already wet. So like misters just provide slower amount of watering. So
a trick I've recently started doing is if I wash lettuce, I'll save the water that I used and use that to water my plants.
Yeah, I do that too. It's a good trick.
Nice. Yeah, someone said the best explanations they've ever heard. So the slides are excellent.
So much.
So Kelly asked, are the canvas bags the best planters to use?
Oh, canvas bags. Those are great. Like they provide good drainage, like really good drainage. So they're really good to use. I personally never use them, but I hear really great things, especially if you don't have a lot of space. They're really great for your plants. Really good option.
Okay. Clara says, how do you know when the plat is ready to be transplanted?
It will tell, so the seed packet will tell you when it should be transplanted out into the garden. So these chives, it says sow indoors in March and put outside in May or August. So it'll say on the seed packet. I don't know if you can see that, but yeah, it'll tell you on the seed packet usually when you need to do that.
Okay. Can you elaborate on soaking seeds?
So soaking seeds can help with germination. So germination is the time it takes. So we just put our seeds into the soil, our chive seeds into the soil, and we will know that the seed has completed its germination when we see a little sprout popping out. So different seeds have different germination rates. So it will give you a range of days on the seed packet, how long it takes for your seed to germinate. It could be between 6 to 10 days, it could be between 8 to 14 days or 7 to 14 days. Some might even take up like even longer than that. So by soaking your seeds, you can increase that germination rate. So instead of having them germinate on the 14th day, maybe you'll see them germinate on the 7th day instead. So large seeds do better with soaking. And again, like the internet will tell you whether some seeds should be soaked or not. So if you like, there's so many plants out there that we can't memorize all of them. So usually you can do a quick search and see whether the seed would be better to germinate or not. But for us, we're going to like soak our spinach for sure and our beets for sure. Like those need to be soaked, and your parsley as well. Does that
Okay,
answer your question?
I think so. Here, I'll go back to the bottom and see if she's added anything. Yeah, I think so. Okay, so when you have to pot up, do you put the whole biodegradable container into the bugger pot or just the plant? And thanks, awesome talk today.
Yeah, so you want to put just the plant into the new pot, but what you can do is you can cut around it to get it out easier and then pot it up into your new pot.
So, so I think he's talking about peat pots. So
Yeah.
peat pots are biodegradable, and those pots will biodegrade, but will take a really long time. And sometimes, like if you're living in a climate that's not very, that's very dry, your peat pots won't decompose. So it's better for climates that are like really humid. So London is very humid, so it might have a better time decomposing. But also, if you want to plant your pots, you could also cut the pots, like cut around at the bottom and then plant it in the ground, and it'll decompose faster. And it if it's not decomposing, the roots won't be able to grow out. So that's why it's better if you cut them and then the roots can grow.
Awesome. Christina says she has a non-heated greenhouse. So how might she use that in the hardening off process?
So non-heated greenhouse is great because hardening off is like making sure that you're controlling for wind and for sun. So the greenhouse is perfect because it'll still provide light and no wind. So she can harden off in there, maybe provide a little extra shade if it's like really, really sunny in there. So by putting a white sheet, it'll still get some sun, mostly shade. And then if it's really sunny in there, then in the later end of the week, she can just take the sheet off and either like rub the plants or even put them outside so that they can get wind in the later end of the week for hardening off.
All right. Barbara says, our garden has walnut trees next door. Is there anything we can do? So that may be in relation to the fact that I know walnut trees often have, there's a lot of plants you cannot grow next to them because of the juglone that they secrete. So do you know anything about that?
I personally don't. Maybe I wouldn't have any information on that.
I've seen resources where, because it's commonly known that a lot of things can't be grown next to them, there are lists that you can find online of plants that can be grown next to them. I can actually find a resource like that and add it in the follow-up email. Okay, Gigi mentions soaking pole bean seeds. Would that help?
Yes.
Okay. Helen says, I'm growing cilantro this year and the package recommends that I plant directly, but can I still start it indoors?
You could definitely look online. A really good website is Gardener's Path. Gardener's Path will tell you, well, the thing is look at how you could, so oftentimes herbs don't tell you how long it takes to mature. So you could look that up. I know that like the chives didn't say how long it will take to maturity because they are a perennial and they'll come back. So usually perennials or biennials, they won't give you how long it takes to grow. So it's hard to determine. But I think you definitely could start your cilantro inside because like when you buy herb plants from the grocery store, like they come in pots and they've obviously started them inside. So I don't see why that would be a problem.
Okay, moving on. Janet says, when do you transplant cold-loving vegetables?
You can plant them before your last frost date. So up to 2 to 4 weeks before. So our last frost date in London is May 24th, but we're going to be planting things outside like in April. So again, the seed packets will tell you when you can plant them outside. And the internet is a great resource. It'll let you know when you can plant things outside, like kale and spinach. Spinach actually won't grow when it's hot, it'll bolt to seed. So, and arugula, so those things, you should put them outside before your last frost date so that you can have growth and actually harvest your kale and your spinach and your arugula before it gets too hot.
Great. So you kind of touched on this next question already, but Tisha asked which cold weather crops can be started indoors and planted out before the first frost?
So things that can be planted indoors and started before. I'll actually just pull up my, I'm gonna just exit the presentation because I'll show you my planting schedule. Oops. So these are the cold winter crops up here. So we have kale, lettuce, bok choy, beets, Brussels sprouts, Swiss chard, broccoli, carrots, onions, arugula. So things that are going to be planted directly outdoors are going to be beets. Beets like the cold. Beets. Beets like the cold, they can be planted directly outdoors. Kale can be started indoors or as a transplant. So we're going to transplant outside April 26th after growing it for a couple weeks. And then we're also going to plant it directly outdoors April 12th. And lettuce can be started indoors and planted before the last frost date. Bok choy can be planted outdoors before the last frost date. So can Swiss chard and broccoli and cabbage and onions. Everything else should be you should wait until your last frost date.
That's great. One person asked what was that website you mentioned before, and that was Gardener's Path.
Yeah.
Okay. Debbie mentioned that the last slide talked about early versus late in the range for doing certain plants, but she didn't catch all of what was on that slide. So could you reiterate what was just up on that last slide?
So what happens is you can have a range when the seed packet will tell you when you should plant things outside. So you can either plant them between 2 to 4 weeks before your last frost date, or after your last frost date. And if it's a tender crop, so it doesn't like the cold, you should plant them at the later range. And if it's a cold loving crop, you can plant them at the earlier range. Does that make sense?
I think so. And I feel like if you have any follow-up questions, you can also unmute and ask. But, Lisa said, would you recommend heat pads?
They're optional, but they might, like if you have a really cold house, you might want to, because some crops won't germinate unless it's really hot, like tomatoes, they like the heat. Melons love the heat. So it really depends what you're trying to grow. Again, that information will be on the seed packet. The seed packet will tell you the temperature it needs to germinate. And if you know your house won't reach that temperature, then and you really want to grow these seeds, then it might be beneficial to get. You can get them relatively inexpensive. You can get one for like $20 if you really invested in your seeds.
Okay, we have a few more questions and we have about 5 more minutes. Before anybody else leaves, I just want to reiterate that EnviroWestern is selling some cucumber seeds. So they'll be available for pickup at the UCC, and I'm just going to share that link again. So yeah, if you want to support EnviroWestern and buy some seeds, just click on that link.
Yeah, and also if you want to apply all the knowledge that you learned today and you want to grow your own cucumber seeds, you should buy a kit.
Exactly. Lisa says she's heard you could use coffee grounds for fertilizer. Is that true?
Coffee grounds is really acidic. I personally haven't done it. I think I would do a little bit more research before giving that to your seedlings. I personally wouldn't. Like, we got fish fertilizer, and fish fertilizer it uses like the fish waste from the fish industry, and it has a really high nitrogen content. So I'm not 100% sure of the nitrogen content in coffee beans, but yeah, I would do more research into that before using coffee grounds.
Sounds good. I'm not sure either, but it seems like it may be a bit harsh, especially when the plants are that young.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Katie says, if you want to plant an organic veggie garden, what is the process in regards to seedlings?
So if you want to have really good organic plants, it's important to feed organic feed and what you're putting in the soil that will eventually make your plants organic, because what you're putting in the soil is what your plant will absorb from its roots. So like if you buy non-organic seeds, like, to me personally, that's not the biggest thing that I should focus on. I should be focusing on reinvigorating the soil with organic fertilizer and amendments.
Okay. Kelly asks, can you send the seed kits through the mail?
I'm not 100% sure. We have pickup times to pick them up in London.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to say no for now.
Yes, and you said there will be certain days where pickup will be available.
Yeah, pickup will start on March 22nd, and it'll be at the UCC at Western.
Okay. People have mentioned I've used tea bags to start seeds before. Barbara says, have you heard of using Epsom salts directly in the garden to help the plants grow healthier?
I have not personally, but when you're planting things in the garden, so nitrogen is really important when you're starting seeds, because nitrogen is what's going to help your seeds grow really strong leaves and stems. But when you're growing things in the garden, you want more phosphorus, because phosphorus is what will help develop really good fruits. So if you're feeding things in your garden with like really high nitrogen, your plants will grow really strong, but you won't see any fruits or flowers. So I'm not 100% sure what the phosphorus content is in Epsom salts, but again, I would do more research on that.
Okay, similarly, someone asked about eggshells.
Yeah, you could start seeds in the eggshells. Is that what the question was, or putting eggshells in your garden?
Oh, so this was a new separate question. How about using crushed eggshells?
That would just provide like drainage, I think. Like provide better drainage, like it's an organic material that would loosen the soil up.
Interesting. Okay, if I go up further, I skipped ahead a little bit, but Debbie asked if you would be able to share that Excel chart that you used so that they could use it for their own use.
I want to say no, because there's just like things in there that I did, like I'm comfortable using it for myself, but I'm not comfortable with sharing it with other people. I put a lot of research and love into that, so I'm not sure whether it would be good for other people, because that's also just based on this date. So in London, and yeah, sorry.
But if you're looking for like more resources on like the timing and all the extra details, the Farmer's Almanac is a really good resource for that. And then also the website you mentioned as well.
Yeah, Gardener's Path. Like you can find, like there's also templates. A lot of websites will give you templates to do your own schedule. And yeah, that was just like my own calendar for what we're gonna grow. But
yeah, And it'll also depend on your area.
Okay, so we're coming up on 1. I know there's a couple of questions we didn't get to. If the speakers are okay with staying a few more minutes, we could do that. But otherwise, if anybody has to get going, get to their meetings at 1 o'clock or whatever, I just want to say thank you so much for coming. We'll reiterate that you'll get the recording, and actually maybe you can put up your social media handle so that people can get in touch with you if they have any questions.
Just a little bit of extra detail. So thank you guys for coming to our webinar. We're going to pick 3 people who attended the webinar today. So Kelsey has graciously tallied everyone who is here, and she's going to put it in a randomization. We're going to pick 3 people. So it'll be an option to win $50 gift cards. So there's 3 winners. If you are in London, you can choose between Heman's Parkway or Downtown Dollars for your gift cards. And if you're not in London, we'll provide other options for you. And again, so Kelsey has all of your emails. So whoever she picks, you might get an email and you might win a $50 gift card.
Yeah, so another perk of taking part today. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so thank you so much for participating. We're so grateful that you decided to join us today and learn how to start your own seeds. We're so grateful. Thank you so much. There's our Facebooks and our Instagrams if you want to like us on Facebook and follow us on Instagram, EnviroWestern and Reforest London and Westminster Ponds. That would be amazing.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks again, everybody, and have a wonderful day.